Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 167 of the Peak of Serenity podcast. I am, as always, one of your hosts, emallson, and joining me, we have my co-host, Anomoly.
Hello.
And this week, we're going to be talking about the new Mana Tea. Mistweaver's got some big mana changes on the PTR, so Anomoly is going to break that down for us in a few minutes. We also have some minor dungeon changes. Like, if you don't care about specifically Neltharus, it doesn't matter.
Yes.
But if you cared about doing some of the snapping shenanigans that people were doing with chains in Neltharus, there's some pretty big changes to that. And then just talking about the raid, because you finished Sark prog this week, right?
I did. We finally, months later, are done with Sarkrath. Yeah. So
Yeah.
we have lots of fun stuff to talk about. I feel like so.
You wanna start with that? You wanna start with
Yeah.
Sark?
Yeah. So we got Sarkrath down this week on Thursday, and it was funny. We finally put together. I think I mentioned this last week. We finally put together like a consistent raid group. In that like we didn't.
Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you put together like the same team to go in maybe even 2 nights in a row, and like we basically cleaned up all our phase 2 wipes, and it was like just learning like the movement in P3 and like where the damage was, and who you need to watch and stuff like that. So no, it was yeah, it was nice. So we made tons of progress on Tuesday, to the point where like Thursday, I don't know if you've ever had this before, but it's like literally on Thursday, if we can walk in there and one shot it, we were
Yeah.
like that close.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, we did not do that. We spent about an hour and a half and then got the kill, which was funny because I was basically like, it's also one of those bosses too where it's like if you don't kill it, like I was like, if we don't kill in the first hour, this is going to be 4 hours of wiping again, and we'll come back next Tuesday and maybe kill it, right? It's like, again, that idea of like we're so close, and if we can just put it together while we're all fresh, then we kill it and it's great.
Right.
But yeah, no, we killed it, and it was, I mean, for me personally, I mean, we can talk a little bit about the fight. It was very anticlimactic of a kill. I don't know if you got the same feeling, but it was a very weird end boss, and really kind of a weird boss in general for like the tier where
Yeah.
it, from a healing point of view, got easier the longer it went. And so it was like
Which phase 3 strat did you guys do?
we did the all up. So we only go down at the start of P3 to like
Yeah.
miss that first whatever the big black circle thing is,
Yeah.
and debuff. But then stayed up the rest of the time.
Yeah.
For all of P3. But even then, like the dispels were the only dangerous part. Like even
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the black hole soaks, because the way we set up our bomb groups is that every person who goes down with a bomb has an immunity. So like when they come back up, they're generally going to be picked as a black hole target, so they can
Right.
just immune it to the side.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like zero healing, basically got easier after P1, and then P2 was kind of a little bit harder, but still not too bad. And then P3 was like heal the people with the debuffs, whether that's picking up a bomb or the duresses, and like that's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So it was
It's
oh sorry.
Did you see there's a 2 heal of it now?
That's what they mentioned. Yeah, my like the raid group, like after we killed it, was like, when can we 2 heal it? I'm like, shut up, guy. Like, but yeah, no, yeah, it was as an end ball. It's funny because I have mixed feelings about how like from a healing perspective, not exciting. Like P1's very exciting in terms of like learning the healing, and sort of a little bit stressful, which is good. But
Yeah.
yeah, the rest of it, like we know. So funnily enough, we did P3 cooldowns on the fly. It was like,
Really?
yeah, so it was like we got to the first knockback, and like our paladin's like, I'm just gonna AM there, and we're like, okay, and then like we get to the next like black hole soak, and our shaman's like, I'll just blink here, and we're like, okay, and then like in the middle, I'm like, I'm just gonna randomly revival if we get low, and like that's how we did cool. Like it was sort of just like, and our
Yeah.
priest did something. He never said anything. He was just like, I'll just heal when we need healing. And so like it's the contrasting that to like a lot of the previous boss, like even Magmarax, for example, like
Yeah.
we had very specific cooldowns like for the end, and I mean Rashok of course was like that.
Yeah.
So
I mean, so for our healing cooldowns for it, we did have assignments. Our assignments for the double dispel at the end were
uh-huh.
just like everything in the kitchen sink. Just like throw everything at it. And then
Yeah.
the rest of the phase is mostly just like, yeah, convoke. Here's a flourish that we couldn't fit anywhere else. You know,
Yeah.
AM because you can.
Exactly. Yeah, that's I mean, we were like I think we wiped to the double dispel probably like 2 or 3 pulls before we actually killed it.
Yeah.
I think the only thing I said there was like just make sure we have rally for that. So like don't use it early in that phase. And like that
Yeah.
was I think the biggest change that helped us get through it.
So
So
on our kill for that, our our double dispel was super safe. We had AMZ, Aura Mastery, Rally, and Cry.
oh Jesus. Okay. Yeah, I think we just had a rally and maybe an AMC. But like I said, we didn't assign anything. So I know we had a
Yeah.
rally. We might add some other stuff. So yeah. It was I mean the regardless of like that part. So I think the healing was sort of like a downside for me in terms of doing the boss. But in general, like I 100% am down for 7.5 minute end bosses. Like
Yeah.
give me a 7.5 minute end boss
That
and
was a
I
good
am
length. Yeah.
yeah, I am perfect. So yeah, because it was, I mean, it's such a contrast to like somebody brought up Sylvanas because on our Sylvanas kill, our first Sylvanas kill, we actually killed it the first attempt of the night on a Tuesday. So after reset, we came back and killed it like the first attempt. So we were like, what do we do the rest of the week? Which is this raid was very similar. We killed it like 90 minutes in. And we're like, oh, I guess we'll do a heroic and bring in a bunch of like trap alts and have some fun, which we did.
A
It was
disaster.
actually it was the most fun like raid we've had in a while because it was just like yeah, it's a bunch of people on like really terribly geared alts.
Yeah.
Like we tried to pull both amalgamations on top of each other and kill them together.
Yes.
Wiped doing that at like 4%. Like
Yeah.
um and so like yeah, I think we had a wipe to Echo because somebody just feared like just basically would mess with the like mind control targets.
Yes.
Um
Oh man.
so it was a good we killed heroic Sark though, which was like we still kill it still took us about an hour and probably 20 minutes. So like not too terribly longer than like what we would normally do.
Right.
But yeah. But no, I mean Sark's a boss fight. I think it was good length. I think it was a weird difficulty. And I think that's primarily I was talking to some of the other guys in Peak about it. It's the Oblivion nerf, right? Like
Yeah, it's the
they
Oblivion nerf
nerf
being too big.
yeah. Yeah, I think if they basically revert that what was it, an additional like 30%, I think, that took
So
off the
it was
damage.
supposed to be a 10% nerf, and they nerfed it by 33%.
Yeah. I think if that's a true 10% nerf, the fight, at least P3 is a little bit more exciting, we'll say.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
in its current state, it's like just literally do the mechanics and then you win. Like the healing check is super low.
There is like the damage check is not super hard.
No.
But you do have to respect it, right? You can't have people doing meme stuff on the ads. Like they have to actually damage the boss as their primary focus.
Yeah.
For our part, like second week of farm this week. Last week we did not get Neltharion down, actually. We spent all of Sunday wiping on Neltharion. We actually had more phase 3 wipes to Neltharion last weekend than we had for our first kill of it.
Oh geez, okay.
Just a lot of issues with portals actually was our main source of phase 3 wipes, and then issues with phase 1 hearts. Like
Gotcha.
Those were the two big things, and we cleaned both of those up, and we killed it in 8 pulls this Friday.
Oh, nice.
9 pulls, something like that. And so we got through everything. We were back on Sark with like 30 minutes left in raid, but we're switching tanks. So my co-tank is going to be going back to DPS, and we were going to have him continue to tank Neltharion and Sarkareth for a little bit, just so we could get re-kills, get people their cutting edge achievements. Well, he's out today.
Gotcha. Oh no.
So we're switching tanks on Sarkareth tonight.
Nice.
It's going to be an adventure.
That'll be fun. Yeah.
A great adventure. Also, they buffed Blood Decay DPS by 10%, and they need like another. I don't know what they need. They need more.
Still need more.
Oh my god. Playing like the threat game when you're ripping off your co-tank, it's so miserable. I was AFK just for part of phase 1. Just hard AFK auto-attacking the boss. Because we were going to make the check anyway, right? We were going to have to stop damage. But I would rip threat if I continued to just go ham on the boss.
Jesus, that's crazy.
Very annoying. Brewmaster does a lot of damage, but that does come with very annoying downside.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
crazy. But yeah, I think part of the topics today we'll do it maybe a little bit later, do like a ranking or overall review of the raid if you want. We'll sort of
Yeah.
hold off on that. But yeah, no,
Yeah.
I mean raid, yeah. So I guess then for us too, we're actually taking next week off as per usual. It's funny, we were gonna do maybe just a single raid on Tuesday and take Thursday off, but it was literally the vote was split like 50-50. So like tiebreaker was like, we'll just take the week.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we're not raiding this week, and then we'll get back into it next week and see some fun anecdotes from our first reclear in a while. Because I think we only killed Rashok once on Mythic,
Rashok
so
is
we've been
not that bad anymore.
yeah, and so I'm not too worried about the reclear, but yeah, it'll be interesting. So well, cool. Well, I think you alluded to at the start. A couple of things happened this week, and a couple of things that made some people maybe not super happy.
Shocker.
So yeah, so in Mythic, so I'll just sort of talk about the Mythic Plus. So in Mythic Plus, particularly in Neltharus, they're basically Blizzard called it fixing bugs, but they fixed the use of the burning chains, right? To or the chains debuffs, which would basically damage enemies around it when you broke them. They basically caused it to no longer damage enemy mobs when you break them. So
it works, just only on enemies that are in the area that the chains are in.
yeah.
So you can still use, if you weren't doing snapping shenanigans, you can still do the same. Like when we do it with guildies, we do that whole area in basically 3 pulls.
Yeah.
You do a big pull with the wardens at the start, with the mini boss, and a bunch of the other trash onto the set of chains that's on the outside, like the main central area. And you just, all 5 players just use chains on it. And it kills pretty much everything except for the mini boss, and the wardens are left at like 10% health. And you kill those, and then you go do Magma Tusk. Because you got a 3-minute cooldown on your chains. Come back. You do the rest of the area before the chain boss with the second set of chains.
Okay.
Then you do the chain boss. And then you do the area after the chain boss with your third set of chains, because your cooldown's back up from doing the boss. And then you go upstairs. And once you're upstairs, you go back to like actually playing your class.
Yeah. Not using chains, yeah.
So this is like specifically targeting, you could snap stuff down or just pull it over to that area. Pull it downstairs, pull it across the room, all this stuff, and just like kill it with chains. And the chains did so much damage that it was just like very efficient.
Yeah. So they've basically nerfed that, which I mean, yeah, people are not too happy about it, because I think at this point now it sort of takes, I think the biggest concern that people had is essentially that if you got in a high run of this dungeon before this change, you basically have locked that position in. Like there's no way to touch that time anymore, or that clear level, with these changes in place, because there's too much damage to be done by individual players now that the chain sort of took over. So
yeah,
that was a lot of, at least like the issues I've had. There was also a number of changes which aren't in these, not directly in these notes that I have, but I know that I saw some notes, like some silent hotfixes, where they've changed the range of a lot of abilities, particularly from some of the bosses, where you can no longer sort of outrange, like Magma Tusk is an ability you can no longer not outrange, and a couple other mobs in the instance. So a lot of changes coming in, which is funny. They're doing that sort of mid-season and sort of as the great push is going on in the background. So
right, I think the great push is a very awkward one, because a lot of these things would be used in the great push.
Yeah,
and so to have them fixed in between great push weekends is pretty awkward.
Because it changes the whole way you, like, particularly the chain stuff in Neltharus. It changes the way you approach that dungeon, right? Like 100%.
Yeah.
So it's a I don't know. I think while I applaud Blizzard for making changes, right? And I think this is maybe the downside of their new mantra of like, hey, we're gonna change things often early. Like the game won't be static for 6 months essentially.
Yeah.
Like this is the potential downside of like them seeing players do certain things and be like, yeah, no, we don't like that. We need to
Yeah.
change it. And then
And I mean, this
rather
is
than
very
wait for
much
a patch,
like
like do it
right.
now.
The Toldagor cannons change, right? You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Where that dungeon, the way people started doing it is you would skip everything, get to the
Mm-hmm.
cannons at the top of the dungeon, and then snap stuff up to the cannons and kill them with the cannons.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much what this is. Pretty much what this is. Sense had posted a like breakdown of the amount of damage you got from each of the different, special things. The chains in Neltharus, the cannons in Toldagor, the weapons in Necrotic Wake, and all the different dungeon specific stuff like that. And most of the other ones were around 15% or less. Meanwhile, chains were at 40% of the damage done in the dungeon. And so that's the kind of like, okay.
Yeah.
They might be a little bit too strong. I would be curious.
Exactly.
I don't know if he was looking at like post hotfix cannons. I assume that he was because that's how they were for most of the expansion.
Yeah, because the cannon changers, they basically gave them essentially like an ammo or like a set number of uses because previously they were unlimited use, right? Was that the
Maybe.
idea?
I don't remember what they actually changed about it. It might have just been that they made it so you couldn't snap stuff up to the top. Like,
Gotcha.
Um,
Yeah. I thought it was
it
they
might be that
put
they
like
have limited
a
uses
charge
as well.
session. Yeah, they put like a limited use on them. Because I remember, at least I remember doing it. You'd always pull like that first cannon. You'd sit there for like the longest time as you like pulled stuff up, and then you'd move on and do the other one. So I think it was just they added like a set of charges or limited use to it. So
yeah.
But yeah, no, I think it. Oh, sorry.
They did have a couple of other actual fixes to Neltharus that are actually good. Like Chargath, aka the chain boss. There's another fix where sometimes he would just bug out and not do anything for the rest of the fight after he cast the fiery focus thing. We had that happen in the key. Very very easy boss if he literally doesn't do any mechanics.
Yeah.
And then, all right, quick aside. I have a nameplate add-on that I have for myself. That there's been this glitch that's annoyed me forever, where the Kalashi wardens in that dungeon, they're volcanic guards. Sometimes the cast bar wouldn't go away.
Oh.
And it stopped recently. I haven't seen that bug in a bit, and it turns out that one of the hotfix notes is fixed a bug that allowed Kalashi Warden's Volcanic Guard to sometimes change directions. I'm just a little bit curious if those two things are related.
Probably.
We'll see if I can manage to like have the bug happen again. I was trying to fix it this weekend, and couldn't reproduce it again. Like I've always failed to reproduce it, and yet it kept happening in keys.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if it is actually something related to this, where you like needed to have multiple players around for it to trigger. But, yeah.
Probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, but I mean, like they've been hot and heavy on these. Neltharus in particular, I think, has gotten the most focus in terms of like fixes, at least this week. So
yeah.
But yeah, speaking. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was gonna switch gears over to the augmentation stuff because there's a few different augmentation changes that came in this week. One of them is an unintended interaction or clever use of game mechanics, as you might call it. So evokers have a talent, Oppressing Roar. Oppressing Roar causes crowd control effects to last longer. Oppressing Roar was increasing the duration of the debuff from the Augmentation Evoker Major cooldown Breath of Aeons while talented into a certain effect. Which is, if you could take a talent and have your, I don't know what Oppressing Roar is, it's like double the CC duration or something.
Yeah.
If you could just double the duration of your main cooldown, you absolutely
It'd be
would.
pretty good.
Yeah,
Pretty good.
yeah. Anyway, they fixed that.
Yeah, unfortunate. They also, I think there was a, I won't say it because I don't know how that worked. But anyway, so yeah, so that's a solid fix, we'll say. Interesting bug. I know that they also Blizzard did release an update to the combat log events for Evoker. So
Yep.
now there are more events. Particularly, they focus, I think, this time on pets, basically pets, guardian summons, so like non-player characters that do damage attributed to a player, and then a lot of the delayed damage effects, like ignite and execution sentence, now have support events.
Yeah.
For Evoker, basically to understand what the Evoker is contributing. So now Evokers look even better on Warcraft logs.
Yeah. Yep.
We'll say, because now they're getting all this additional attribution that essentially was just attributed to the individual player. Now it's coming back and being attributed to the augmentation Evoker.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because there's still, I know that at least our raid leader or main tank posted a list of things that are still missing from the support events. Fun fact, Mistweaver Monk only has a single spell that has support events for it, and that is Zen Pulse. Everything else unsupported.
Even like Rising Sun Kick and stuff like that.
Yeah, apparently, yeah.
Wow.
Because they're different spells. Like, so that's the weird thing about Monk in general, is that a lot of the spell IDs are different, even though the name of the spell is the same. So like, and I think it's because like Rising Sun Kick is hasted for Mistweaver, but not hasted for Windwalker. Is it hasted for Windwalker?
Well, it's hasted for Brewmaster.
I think Brewmaster and Mistweaver have the same Rising Sun Kick spell, but Windwalker I think is slightly different. In any event, like that's sort of the idea. Yeah. Is like it's something weird like that, where there's like one stat or something. Yeah, some interaction is different between the specs, and so they've just built new spells. Like previously, like an interesting anecdote is like Blackout Kick. The additional Blackout Kicks you get from Ancient Teachings are a different spell ID.
Yeah.
And so like when they'd make like Blackout Kick gets 10% more damage and it applies to everything. It never applied to those specific Blackout Kicks because they're a different spell, and Blizzard just forgets that the Monk class is held together with like not even Mistweaver, it's just like the class in general is like held together with duct tape. Like
there's stuff like Rising Sun Kick worked for Weapons of Order for Brewmaster. As soon as we got access to Rising Sun Kick, because it's the same spell as the Windwalker Rising Sun Kick, which I guess would imply that the Windwalker Rising Sun Kick is hasted. But anyway, because the original version of Weapons of Order for Windwalker triggered off of Rising Sun Kick in the same way that our Keg Smash triggers Weapons of Order. So it just worked, even though it wasn't in the tooltip, because when they changed Weapons of Order for Windwalker, they gave them a completely different spell and just changed the tooltip of the what became the Brewmaster Weapons of Order.
That's so funny. Yeah. So I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, that was the one thing that like Mistweaver's still missing a bunch of support events, but they've added more, and I think they'll continue to do it. So
yeah, healing is still completely unattributed. Like you mentioned a bunch of Mistweaver specific stuff, but healing in general does not get reattributed, right?
Yeah, and so that like none of the Mistweaver damaging abilities right now get the attributes, which should, because they're just going to be the same as the Windwalker or Brewmaster stuff. So yeah, that was a big change. I'm assuming like we'll get incremental updates to the combat log for the rest of the expansion for augmentation, which is good.
Also, as a note, as of right now, there's no partition for Warcraft logs for rankings. And that is in part because there are still some pretty significant bugs with damage reattribution. For example, Kill Command wasn't working. They might have hotfixed that, but Kill Command was not actually scaling off of. Apparently, it wasn't scaling off of the bonus stats off of Ebonmite. It also wasn't getting reattributed, but we thought it was a reattribution bug, that it was just like not reattributing, but it was scaling. Turns out it was neither scaling nor reattributing. I don't know what state it's in now, but it's not. It's broken. Anyway. Yeah. And then there's some other fun things, like someone sent us one. Okay. Someone had the brilliant idea that as a Moonkin, it would macro start attack to all of their spells. Stay next to the boss. To get some free DPS from meleeing the boss in between their spell cast. Okay? this is not worth doing in any meaningful way.
Yeah,
You're
no,
gonna
yeah.
lose more DPS trying to be in melee from the movement that causes you to have to do than you're
Yeah.
gonna gain from the auto attacks. Please don't try and do this. Anyway, we found out that reattribution for that is broken as well.
Nice.
Where it actually takes more damage from, like, it gives the augmentation evoker more damage than the boomkin auto attack actually did.
Nice. Nice.
And that's one of those things where, like, does that really matter?
Yeah.
But also kind of points to, well, maybe we should just let it be for right now so that people can generally continue investigating, because who knows if that points to a bug with other kinds of auto attacks.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Interesting. So crazy.
Yeah.
It's always fun when they add like, I mean, when they add like new crazy stuff like this. So it's interesting all the different interactions they probably just don't even think about or realize, right? That are out there for the augmentation stuff. But yeah.
Yeah. I also, like, quick note, tapping off the augmentation stuff, there's now an option in Warcraft log to show the original damage values that you would see in game. So this is what you would see in details and things like that, which is, I think, mostly useful for exploring these kinds of buggy interactions.
Yeah.
But it is there now. There's the augmented damage option, and as part of that, so originally on Warcraft logs, the like magnitude, the size of an individual hit that you would see, like if you looked at the column that showed your average hit for, Rising Sun Kick was 100k, that would be including the buff from Augmentation Evoker. Like that computation used the original hit sizes, and that was kind of intentional because it was kind of unclear how people would want to interact with that data, and
Yeah.
it ended up being that it was confusing to people. And so now the unaugmented view shows that number, and the regular view shows the regular value.
The attributed value. Yeah.
The value with the reattribution. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So that got changed too.
Oh, nice.
And I want to just, like, really briefly, 30-second, Glorbo is back.
Oh, I saw that. Yes, Glorbo is back. I didn't put it in the notes, but yes, Glorbo is back.
Really wanted to briefly mention they got. Is this the same site?
Z League or something. Z something was the original. I don't know if it's the same site. Is it the same site they got?
Fuck. I didn't actually read enough detail. No, it is not the same site. It is Tech Briefly.
Gotcha.
Briefly this time. Glorbo making his way to Destiny 2.
Yeah. Oh god.
With the gloriously syntactically broken article title, "What is Destiny 2 Secret Boss Glorbo?"
It's getting bad out there. It's getting bad. I mean, like, a little bit of the real world too. It's like I saw people linked, or not people linked, but I saw a link to like a job posting from one of the studios for like an AI manager, and essentially what you'd end up doing is like helping to create AI like scripts or like show outlines, and then like editing them to like basically be able to do the work without writers, essentially.
Yeah, that's a lot of the ongoing actor and writer strike.
It's like
is surrounding things like that, and not wanting to pay writers and actors for their labor. So yeah.
What a world we live in, man.
Yep.
AI is finally here to take all our jobs. Super excited for that.
Starting with the Writers Guild.
Exactly.
Who could have foreseen this?
Not me, for sure.
Yeah, you want to switch gears and talk about the manatee?
I do. So I'm excited. First off, excited just to see changes, which is cool. But yeah, so Blizzard posted in their both in the actual PTR version. So this is live on PTR as we speak, but also provided some notes and context. The new manatee, basically the new manatee redesign. So initially we thought just going to be a manatee redesign, but it actually ends up being both a manatee redesign and a little bit of a talent redesign. So things have shifted around in the talent tree, which is cool. So talk about manatee first, and then maybe the talent tree second. So
okay.
With Mana Tea, what has been redesigned, so I'm just going to read it word for word and we can talk about it, is for every 25,000 mana you spend, you gain 1 stack of Mana Tea, with a chance equal to your critical strike to generate an additional stack. And then you can activate Mana Tea to consume 1 stack of Mana Tea per half second to restore 3,000 mana and reduce the mana cost of your spells by 50% for 1 second per stack of Mana Tea consumed after drinking. And you can cast this while moving, but your movement speed is reduced while you're channeling. And so we've done a lot of tests around this. So the essential idea, if you didn't understand what I'm saying, is that every time you spend 25,000 mana, you generate 1 stack of Mana Tea, and then you have a chance at that point to generate a second stack based on your crit. So if you have 30% crit, you have a 30% chance to generate an additional stack.
Okay.
Which is sort of a weird combination of the way old Mana Tea used to work. So we're talking like WoD era Mana Tea when multi-strike was the thing, which is where you had a chance on using certain spells like Jab or Soothing Mist to generate a stack of Mana Tea, and then your multi-strike
If you
added an additional. If you multi-struck the generation event, you could then get a second charge that way. So it's basically a little bit of a mishmash of like old Mana Tea, new Mana Tea. Same idea too of like channeling to generate mana back. That's very much how like WoD era, even MOP era Mana Tea worked. And so a couple of interesting interactions with this. So this does only stack up to 20, same amount of stacks we used to get, which means you'll be able to generate 60,000 mana for a full set of channels. It'll take about 10 seconds to full channel.
Current mana bar size is 250,000. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So that is
so about 20%ish, a little bit over 20%.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is good. It's a solid sort of increase. A couple of things about the way the mana piece works. So spending the mana, meaning you have to spend 25,000 mana. We did a bunch of testing about this, so it's interesting. So, if you have a reduction buff on you, like Mana Tea itself or Clouded Focus from like channeling that, the reduced amount goes into that 25k, not the full amount of the spell.
Okay.
Which is interesting. Which contradicts a little bit where like if you have Innervate as a buff, which makes your spell cost 0 mana, it's actually the full mana cost actually goes in to the 25k. So Innervate's still good to be able to use. And then mana refunds don't reduce the tally for a clouding. So like Escape from Reality doesn't reduce.
Right.
You basically get that mana back, but you've already spent it, so it still counts into the 25k.
Right.
So a couple like weird interactions there. The channel is not hasted, although we think it should be. So we've got some feedback on the post.
Yeah.
But it's still a half-second channel consuming stack, so not hasted. The GCD is hasted though. So it triggers a standard 1.5 second GCD, so that's hasted. What else is interesting? And you only consume, so you don't have to consume every stack at once. Basically, you can start the channel,
interrupt it, and cancel it. Any stacks that you don't use.
Exactly, yeah. Which is just how old Mana Tea used to work too. So it's an interesting take. I mean, the one thing is sort of using it at least a little bit, like not in a raid or any actual group content, but just like messing around with it on PTR. The reduction after you use it plus the actual channel is an interesting way of interacting with it, because it essentially is like a break in the flow of playing Mistweaver, meaning like today, we'll say right now with the Clouded Focus raid build, I'll speak mostly to raids, and I don't do a ton of Mythic Plus, but in raid, right, you want to always be like hitting Rising Sun Kick on cooldown, using Renewing Mist on cooldown, and sort of trying to basically always have a GCD where you're pushing out more Renewing Mist, so you have more out on the raid. When you need to do your big Clouded Focus ramps, you have them available. You have the Renewing Mist available.
Right.
And so this is sort of stopping that a little bit. So there's probably a little bit of gameplay we need to investigate of like, what is the best way to potentially use this? Is it to like drink for 2 seconds, stop, get back into it, or like find those like individual like half second or 1 second times where you can, channel this Mana Tea, cancel it early, and then sort of go again. Because I'll say in like original Mana Tea, like WoD era Mana Tea, like at least the way I played it, which might not be the best way to play it, was like if I ever cap stacks, it's essentially just to drink to full and then do it all again, right? Because
Yeah.
like that mana tea was a full mana bar if you drank all 20 stacks. So it's like do a bunch of healing, find a good 10-second window in the fight where you can sit and drink at that point, and then go back into using all your mana because
Yeah.
you don't have a full bar again. So
I mean, we have a more modern analog of it too with the sleepy potions, right?
exactly, yeah.
And that's where
Yeah.
we brought up Sylvanas earlier, but at the end of the first Sylvanas intermission, you would like at least our healers would all just sleepy pot.
Yep.
And so that's a scenario where like your renewing mists are all going to expire during the RP anyway. So there's no point in like trying to maintain your renewing mists on the raid. So at that point, you might as well, mana tea for just the full value. And there's other instances like that where like I can imagine on Sark, for example, everybody's gonna go downstairs. You do the gate over to the thing at the end of the first phase, and you just like pop mana tea. You roll forward, pop mana tea, and get pushed back into your spot, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some points on current end bosses where you could use it, but yeah, it's a very similar idea of like using the channel when there's nothing going on. You're going to some sort of intermission, like even Rashok, going into like the first intermission. I used to drink pot there, pretty much every pull. But yeah, so I mean, I think that'll be the way that you end up trying to use it. I don't think the reduction doesn't seem worth it to game, at least at this point, because it's only 1 second for essentially 1.5 seconds. Like to basically make use of it, you'd probably have to sit and utilize, probably 3 to 4 seconds worth of channeling time to get enough of your 1 second like reductions to make it worthwhile after the fact. And with the current at least raid build being clouded focus, like you already have like enough mana to like not need the reduction side of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean we'll see how it plays out and sort of like as we get a chance to start using it, but it's definitely a better change, a more interactive change to the spell versus today where it's like you hit it whenever you need to cast a bunch of spells in a row and then that's it. Like it's just a 50% reduction. So
just a bad innervate right now.
Exactly. And so so yeah, a lot more interaction with it, a lot more sort of trying to find parts of the fight where it makes sense to use. I mean, the reduction might start to be something where you'd like want to use mana tea. Like the problem ends up being is that you end up like needing 4 to 5 seconds of channeling to get that reduction to be at a point where it's usable. And those 4 to 5 seconds right before you want to ramp into healing, at least the way you currently heal as a Mistweaver, is like you want to be able like getting renewing mist out, using Rising Sun Kick, maybe fishing for a reset or two right before you go into like your big healing moment. So yeah, we'll see with how it works. With how it works out and sort of the actual plays out. But look, I'm all for making changes like this to talents mid tier, to maybe get some new playstyle in, right? Or just to make any changes to the class to sort of make it a little bit more interesting. So
there's a couple of other talent changes that go with this, right? You got one talent that's now baseline. You got a couple other talents removed. I guess some of it is like related to or removed, redesigned, and a lot of that is related to mana tea, right? Like life cycles got a redesign. Now it generates mana tea stacks.
Basically. Yeah, has a chance to generate mana tea stacks as you flip flop between the spells. Yeah, so that's sort of the lifestyle or life cycles redesign. It also has become a choice node with a new talent called Energizing Brew, which Energizing Brew makes your mana tea channel 50% faster and generate 20% more mana, which almost seems like a default choice. It basically takes the tick rate of like, instead of having to channel for half a second to get your mana restore, you can channel for 0.25 seconds or a quarter second.
Right, and that means that you could consume half your stacks you could consume what normally it's 3 stacks in a
GCD.
In a GCD, this would let you consume 6. It's quite a bit of mana.
Yeah, and it increases the mana generated, so it's now instead of 3,000 mana, it's 20% more, so it's 3,600, 3,300, something like that.
Yeah, 3,600.
I can't do math on my. Yeah, so it's more mana too for less time. So that'll probably end up being maybe the choice you take if you're taking mana tea, which is interesting. They've also a couple of big things. You mentioned Mastery of Mist is now baseline. So Mastery of Mist was the talent that gave you an additional renewing mist charge, which
Okay.
everyone took anyway.
Yeah.
So basically, you always wanted 2 charges of renewing mist. Now it's baseline a part of the spell, so you'll always have 2 charges. And essentially, Manatee took over the position where Mastery of Mist was in sort of the tree. Manatee basically moves into the tier 1. I don't know how to pronounce it, but the first section, the tier 1 section of your talent tree.
Yep.
And is no longer a choice node. And then they've removed Spirit of the Crane, which was the mana generating talent where as you consume Teaching of the Monastery stacks, you generate mana back. Yeah. So now Manatee ends up being our only mana like reduction or mana in like interacting talent. Yulon has a mana reduction, but that's a cooldown, so I don't consider that
right.
Really that the example of like, hey, can you generate something mana on demand? So and as a part of this, a bunch of talents moved around, not to get too deep into it, but basically it's really been like the middle section has had a large redesign where the left-hand side, which had a lot of where Spirit of the Crane sat and some of the Life Cocoon updates and PvP specific things, that's all been redesigned. And so now no longer Spirit of the Crane there. There's a couple different connection points in that. And then the right-hand side, which is where Manatee used to sit, now that that's earlier, that's also slightly different in how those connections work. Some of the new talents sit there, and they've moved some talents around in that section. So, it's weird. It's weird, the new talent tree. I think you generally like if Clouded Focus still is the play, the talent tree will look generally the same. You're now taking Manatee though, and a couple of different points there, but I think in general, yeah, the sort of a lot of difference in that middle section, which is again cool. So yeah, I think overall I am personally excited about the change. Like I said, I always liked old Manatee anyway. Like I think the idea of like spending your mana bar and then like spending your mana bar to a point in a fight and then finding a point in that fight where you can sit and drink is to me an interesting part of playing the spec.
Right.
And so yeah, but some people aren't exactly excited. I mean, a lot of people are like, this is not what I wanted, or the idea of it isn't exactly what I wanted. But I mean, I don't know. I think it offers some interesting gameplay choices, we'll say, and when you actually leverage the buff.
Yeah.
The GCT, the only, I guess my only feedback I think in terms of this would be 2 points. Number one, I do think the channel should be hasted. I think that's a good change. And number two, it triggering a GCD is weird. Because it essentially locks you into at least using 3 ticks, regardless of what happened. Well,
I mean, they could
at
give
least 2.
But... So Expel Harm has a 750 millisecond hasted GCD.
Yeah,
they could give it like that, which does make it nicer. The issue with making it like off GCD is then if you have an instant cast spell, you could like macro it in, right? You Rising Sun Kick, and it just starts your Manatee. And yeah. So real quick,
I mean, I would say maybe my point would be give it a GCD equal to the tick speed, meaning like if you have to channel it for at least half a second, GCD should be half a second. Yeah, which still doesn't alleviate your problem of like you could still probably macro it into.
No, you can't then because it's got if it's on the GCD, you can't basically.
Oh, that's right, because you'd use it and then it would trigger. Yeah, so I mean that would be maybe the way that I would go is essentially make the tick rate the same as the GCD, because right now it just feels like you're stuck with the channel not being hasted, but your GCD being hasted. You're stuck at least using 2 ticks, and then you have like an awkward amount of time.
Yeah.
Before your 3rd tick kicks in,
where you're off the GCD, but you haven't gotten your 3rd tick yet.
Yeah. So, but I mean, as a first iteration, I think it's an interesting way to go about doing a mana talent, like because the previous version of this was like all chance based getting stacks, just by doing abilities, and now you have a pretty set like, okay, every amount of mana I spend, I will get a stack, and then I can turn that into an amount of mana. By channeling. So
so just real quick to show the kind of reshuffling of the tree, I pulled up the talent calculator for Mistweaver. This is the current talent tree. All the old classics. There's a few changes that stood out to me aside from the ones we already talked about. So obviously, Spirit of the Crane goes away. That means Chrysalis and Burst of Life, aka the Life Cocoon talents, get moved.
Moved in, yeah.
Manatee is now up here at the top in the before the first gate, like you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And Life Cycles and Energy Brew down here, Energizing Brew in the old location of Manatee. That also involved moving this Invigorating Mists a little bit, but it's still before the first gate. And then for whatever reason, they just like moved Awakened Feline. Just
Yeah, I noticed.
they
I
just
noticed
moved
that.
it. It just
Yeah,
moved like one row or one column to the left for no apparent reason.
yeah, I saw that. And I was like, this. Because I remember, like, I don't know if you did. Like, for me, like visually, I kind of can remember layouts of things. So it's like I
Yeah,
knew the layout was different in that corner, and I remember like flipping back and forth, being like, what is off in this area? Like, not realizing it. But yeah, they
I
just
guess it
moved it
kind of
over.
makes it symmetrical because there's Legacy of
Yeah,
Wisdom on the
on the
right
far right.
side
Yeah,
of the tree that also juts out at the bottom, just like Awakened Phalanx now juts out. And before the whole thing was kind of off balance anyway because of the whole Spirit of the Crane and the
yeah,
Life
that
Cocoon
section.
talents kind of being off to the side, so it didn't you couldn't make it symmetrical anyway before. Now they could, and you're like, aha,
Yeah,
symmetry.
they love it. They love it. But no, yeah, the middle part is like it looks. It's funny. The nodes look like they're in the same position, but there's like they've moved talents around, so each node is even slightly different
Yeah.
from that. So,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, no, it's a cool change to Mistweaver. So we'll see how it plays out. I mean, the problem with sort of really doing any sort of thinking about it now is it
It's
with the
gonna
two
change.
piece, it's going to change, I think. And then the other thing is too, with the current raid set, the two piece that we get so much mana from the two piece, and the fact that we're running the Clouded Focus and Yulan in raid, that like you essentially have unlimited mana anyway. Like
Yeah.
this, like even though like talking about Sark a little bit, but like typically on end bosses, there's like a point where I'm like, I am out of mana and we are wiping like late
Yeah.
in the thing. Even without the less healing, like I don't think I went below like 50% on any of our attempts because it's just like you
Yeah.
generate so much mana from the current tier. So when
Yeah.
that goes away, it'll be interesting to see how it, yeah, how we play around this with Manatee. So
Yeah.
um
There are just briefly mentioned there are other changes data mined on the PTR. I think the
mhm.
vast majority of them are just baking in hotfix effects. Like I looked through the Brewmaster ones and they're all just the hotfixes that went into live recently. So it looks
Mhm.
like it's just them baking in the hotfix effects to the spell data on the P.
Gotcha. Gotcha. That makes sense. That makes sense. Typically, the first couple PTRs are, yeah, because I know the Windwalker ones look like the PvP changes they talked about this
Right.
week. So
Yes.
yeah, um, but yeah, no, that's the new Manatee. So it's yeah, we'll see how it plays out. It's fun. It's interesting. People, I mean, everybody's got an opinion. So some people are happy, some people aren't. But I mean, I was expecting something very similar to this of like the old charge based Manatee, which
Right.
I think to me is still like Mistweaver to me will always be like Mist of Pandaria WAD era will always be the best iteration of the spec.
Right.
So like anything we get to go back to that, I think is cool. So not exactly the same. Old Manatee, definitely much stronger.
Yeah.
But the healing game was different and like the game was kind of different back then. So
Yeah.
this is a good change, we'll say. A good change. So well, cool. I think the final topic we had just for the last 10 minutes here was just sort of I want to do a little bit of like a just like a raid recap. I mean, now that we've both cleared it,
Yeah.
I don't think we've sort of talked about like what we've liked, what we disliked. Was this a quote unquote the always question that people ask, like, was this a good raid? Um, and so I wanted to get maybe your thoughts on some of like maybe standout moments, standout bosses, and then we've already done a little bit of a review of Sarkareth, so you've got my points on it. But
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I would say on the whole, it was a good raid. It was a fun raid. It's a raid that I've enjoyed. It's a raid that, aside from, I think Neltharion is the one that at least so far on farm feels bad.
Hmm.
The others, like, we're already talking about doing some of the more meme stuff on some of the earlier bosses. There's like Skarn with the changes that he has received is just not that bad anymore. It turns out
Yeah.
that when you remove the things like the spell queuing, shitty overlaps, and the trap RNG, it's just not that big of a deal anymore. Like,
Yeah.
I still don't like that they completely removed all of the RNG from the fight. But, you know, the fight as it is now is just perfectly fine to reclear. So, you know, it's
Yeah.
fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
And there's some other alternate strats that we're looking at for that now as well, where like there's a strat where you just park in the middle left after the first few traps, and you just use your trap clears to clear the stuff that spawns in the middle.
Yeah.
Because now the raid baits where the tactical destructions go, so you just have the raid move to bait the tactical destruction.
Yeah, rather than the boss. Yeah.
Rather than
Oh,
the
that's a good
boss.
idea. That's a good idea.
So we're gonna
Yeah.
look at that as well. But just like I think even as far as prog goes, like the big standout this tier in terms of prog was absolutely Rashok.
Yeah.
Rashok
Yeah.
is a good fight. Rashok also farmed guilds like no other early boss. Like for because of the changes to Scar, it was a quote unquote wall where it differentiated people that hit it at different points. But it was not, it was like a negative wall. Like the people who got there at a very specific point in time just like skipped the boss.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah.
And so the people that were at the really high end just fucking killed the thing in like a raid night.
Yeah.
And then you had the people that were getting there after the fix to the boss, but also weren't that high end, like super high end caliber guild, where it was like a 2 or 3 nights.
Yeah. Exactly.
And so yeah, that's but
Yeah, I mean, oh, sorry.
you know, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, I think, yeah, my take on the raid, very similar to yours. Like, yeah, agreed. Good. I mean, it's fine. Like, I don't think, other than Rashok, no fight was really like a standout. Like, this is a top. Like, I'm gonna talk about this fight or bring this up in like a positive light after the fact. But I think the interesting to me about most of these fights, even Sarkareth, for example, is very much on like a set timer. Like, there wasn't
Yes.
many like, you need to push the boss by this point to miss out on an ability, or like to, there wasn't like a lot of that like push timing pieces.
Yeah,
It was very much a like, you start the boss fight and things happen at a set time throughout the boss fight, and like you just deal with that as it may. And I don't
really
sorry.
appreciated like there was this attention to detail on Forgotten Experiments, where that is the classic kind of boss where you run into this issue where like by delaying one boss spawn time, you might be able to change which overlaps occur and get significantly easier or significantly harder overlaps. And they were like, no,
It's global timer.
global timer. If you push, like, there's still some things that do happen from that, where like if you push the first boss at a bad time, like slightly too early, you get an extra set of the orb deep early. But then they actually set up the global timers for that. So there's actually a huge window at the start of the fight where you can push the boss and not have that happen.
Yeah.
So it's extremely easy to just like lust on pull once you're back on farm and just not have to happen, not have to stop DPS, just fucking go and not have any bad push timer stuff happen.
Yeah. Yeah, that was, I think, the probably the one highlight I'll say, but that also to the detriment of like later bosses like Sarkareth. You knew the length of time you had to kill that boss before you even started pulling it. It's a 7.5 minute fight, because at that point it enrages, and it's not, doesn't matter if you do, 100k DPS more in the first phase versus the second phase, you're going to hit that 7.5 minutes, and that's going to be when that boss. Well, I guess the first phase you can push early, but in general, you're not doing that on the least prog, right?
Right, but
So,
I would not totally agree with that, because you can't really hit the HP breakpoints to push early on prog. So that any extra damage that you can find in phase 1 and phase 2 of Sarkareth does matter, because it like ending phase 2 of Sarkareth at 45% HP instead of ending phase 2 of Sarkareth at 48% HP is like a pretty big difference, because you're talking about, around 10-15 seconds of time cut off at the end of phase 3 by doing
Right.
that extra DPS at that point in time. And that can mean that you just don't hit the enrage.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, maybe I didn't make my point well enough. I agree. So I agree with that. My point was more of like there wasn't the same level of like having to push the boss by a certain point in time,
Right.
because you were never going to get there. Like the idea was is like all throughout farm. I agree. Any more damage you can do in P1 and P2 make P3 easier. But the idea is like you didn't need to push P1 by a certain point in time because you were always going to hit that phase transition timer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So like it felt, at least from a progression perspective, very much on rails and like without much RNG in terms of like, I mean, the biggest RNG for us, particularly in P2, was like, can we get this melee circle stacked enough to like, so we don't have to bump ads back into it, right? And then grip them out. So yeah. But I mean, like every fight was like that. Magmarak's very much a like timer based fight. Like, that fight, Forgotten Experiments, like you said. But yeah. I mean, I agree. Or I think, yeah, that's my only, I'd say like downside of it. It was very much an execution raid, I'd say, versus like a like thinking on your feet raid. And other than Zakar, like the Zakarn version you and I progressed,
right,
every other fight was like map out cooldowns, map out movement, do that and win, right? There wasn't like a lot of like chance to like play like, hey, like do this or move some DPS here or like make an on the fly call for something. So
the other one,
other than Zakarn, which like people hated, I don't know why, but Zakarn was not that bad.
Zakarn was bad.
I don't agree. I thought it was fine, but yeah.
The other one that actually does have that thinking on your feet kind of like as a major element of it is Echo of Neltharion with the Volcanic Hearts, which has a whole, like, there's a whole bunch that goes into that fight where like it just was not too, like, we were talking about this in one of the tank discords yesterday, or where like it was, I don't think when they started looking at private auras, I don't think that they really understood how powerful weak auras and other UI elements are, and how bad their own UI is for some of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Volcanic Heart puts a big circle on you, right? And so you, even though it puts a big circle on you, if your whole raid stacked, it's hard to tell that it's on you. So you do actually need an add-on, basically, to tell you that you have it. They're very limited in what they can do. They can only show the debuff and play a sound effect, right? But you do still kind of need one, or you need to do something different with the face. So you're not all stacked all the time. But then just the whole like not being able to do the assignment aura thing made that just really unpleasant with the way it was tuned, right? The fact that you had 5 people that had to coordinate and go to correct spots on a fairly tight timer, where like, if you're going to a spot and somebody else also is going to that spot, you do not have time to turn around. You do not have time. You commit and you hit a personal and you hope that you live. And odds are good that you don't, unless you've planned on that being a point where that happens, because of how hard the cleave hits. The cleave one-shots. If you get clipped by one of these, you die. Which is another element of it that is kind of annoying, where like the size of them obviously initially was huge, 25 yards. Actually, very funny. Every time this comes up, I want to point it out. You could not, as an evoker, be in range of the boss while you had Volcanic Heart. You still realistically can't, but at least at 20 yards, there's a 5-yard window where you could, in theory, be in range of the boss. That whole mechanic, though, is just like, you do have to think on your feet, but the degree to which you still need external tools because of the tuning of that mechanic, because of how short the time for it is and how big the radius is, and how dangerous it is. It's not just like, Volcanic Heart applies a dot to people it hits, both people that are the target of it and people who get cleaved by it. The fact that it applies a dot to people who get cleaved by is completely irrelevant because they just immediately die.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just completely irrelevant that
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, yeah, I would say like, yeah, I would agree that type of mechanic, it was too soon. Like they do need more tools in the UI, like the base UI to deal with these sort of like, if they're going to go down the path of putting more like mechanics, not specifically volcanic heart, but more mechanics on this sort of private aura list. Like I think they need better tools in the base UI to combat it, or to at least like be able to deal with it, right?
Yeah, and I mean,
I think the ping system so just, I mean, I think the ping system coming would have been a good to have on Neltharus, because you could ping the location you were running to,
yeah,
and
but even
still
then,
you'd probably still
you
run into
wouldn't
that
have enough
situation.
time, right?
Well, I mean, you could. Yeah, I mean, maybe.
The
I
volcanic
mean, you
heart
still need
just
the weeks. You'd still
yeah,
need the list week, or I guess any of it. But like,
yeah,
you could at least make micro adjustments, like make adjustments so you weren't clipping someone else. Like,
yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah,
It was just that mechanic was just like it is that the one other noteworthy like think on your feet kind of deal, but because of the way the mechanic was constructed and how like big it was, how much damage it does, how fast it is, how frequent it is, and how
yeah,
space constrained you are on that fight, um, it's just uh very unpleasant. That's like my number
yeah.
one least favorite thing on farm so far has been dealing with phase one of Neltharion.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah. Well, I mean, in 2 weeks, I'll be able to give my thoughts on our first farm raid, see how we go. I mean, hopefully we get back to that Eltharion, but
I
um,
would say that like so for our farm, the only boss on our first reclear that took us more than like was Skarn.
gotcha.
Actually, no, Magmarax did too. Magmarax respect the soaks or the soaks will kill you.
Fair enough. Fair
Yep,
enough.
yep. And then
Fair
there was
enough.
Echo of Neltharion that took us like 6 hours to rekill.
Jesus. Yeah.
That and that's like different people in right.
Yeah. Like different comps in general. Yeah.
Yeah, people in that hadn't really played the boss at all before on Mythic and learning the heart positions and all that stuff and just how
Oh
brutally
God.
unforgiving it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean,
Always fun.
we get to put 4 hours in on Sark tonight, and it should. Our comp is mostly the same. Should not require the full 4 hours. Fingers crossed.
Nice. Well, I hope it's over early for you. So, but cool. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I think in general, decent raid. Like one really standout fight. I don't think. I mean, boss fight's fine. I think it's funny. At least for me, the highlights are the shortness of it. I think is a nice little reprieve from some of like the
15-minute boss
jailers
fights,
and
yeah.
Sylvanas from last expansion. So, and even Razagath, was what, 13 minutes, right? Or maybe 11
Razagath
after the nerfs.
was around 12:30.
Yeah.
And Sylvanas, of course, was infamously 14 minutes. Jailer was around 11.
Yeah.
For a lot of guilds that actually they got CE before the nerfs. And then like Nizoth was 12 minutes or something like that.
Yeah. But this all, God, don't.
Yeah.
That is still to be fair, I consider that the worst end boss I've ever progressed on. And
But
I
you
think it's
progressed it
honestly
as a tank, and that's why.
as a tank. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's mostly because I was a tank.
Yeah.
And to be fair, it's only the Psychus phase that I hated.
Psychosis was the one redeeming factor of tanking that fight.
It was no. If
Yeah.
the fact of the matter that the edges of the room were off limits to the mob, but players could go out there and the mob would just skate away. Like,
Oh, okay. Yeah, that was really dumb.
Like just like that position, like that
Yeah.
was to be fair, when I say this, like his phase, it's that particular point where you had to drag the mob out to get some of the end or the outside
Yeah.
eye stalks. Like that would be the only point of it being like, I hate everything about this game because I just watch as the eye stalk goes down and the mob just the
Psychus
slowly skates away,
Yeah.
just slowly walks away from me and the eye stalk, and then it dies and we lose the debuff and we're like, well, wipe, let's go again. And they're like, no, what'd you do? And I was like, I don't know, because
Yeah.
I am standing on top of the eye stalk.
Yeah. It is
and
impressive how bad as tank fights every end boss in BFA was.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. So yeah,
I think like I would say for the past two expansions, like in terms of end bosses, the Nathrius is still the best.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
I would put Sarkar at second. Output.
So it's Sylvanas, Jailer, and Razageth, right? Are the only other three other than Denathrius?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's an easy second. I mean, like,
Yeah.
of the past 2 expansions, 100% second favorite.
I mean, honestly, I would have the past 3 expansions too. I think Sarkareth is better than every end boss in BFA.
Jaina though.
Jaina was dog shit. If you tanked it, you would agree.
Yeah, that's fair. I think Rollbait. I think for me, Jaina holds a special place in my heart just because of the way we killed it. But
okay.
But yeah. I mean,
Fair
that
enough.
boss, the end of that's the last time I think I screamed killing an end boss was Jaina. But we literally the entire raid, like 2 people got frozen as she slowly ticks down to 5%. It's like it was the weirdest thing because it was like that delayed, like, oh, we killed it, but like maybe not yet, and then oh yeah, we killed it, and like everybody was excited. So
and then like I don't know. The Jailer is another fight. So you mentioned that Sarkareth is on rails, and we can go ahead and wrap up this discussion. But Sarkareth is very much on rails. The Denathrius and the Jailer are both like that. The Jailer, though, has the Phase 1 holes mechanic is eerily similar to the issues with the Echo of Neltharian Volcanic Hearts.
Yeah.
And that is why that boss was awful to product. It's just Phase 1. If you cut out Phase 1, I think Jailer would have been one of the best.
Yeah, because I mean, well, there's no more line of sight mechanics too. So like, any boss that has a line of sight mechanic, like, is just a shit boss.
Or if they just like, there's things they could have done that they also could have done for Volcanic Hearts on Echo of Neltharion. It would have made that much more palatable. Like, it is very like. Actually, viewing it that way, viewing Volcanic Hearts as them trying to do the Jailer Holes mechanic without a weak aura, and then people needing now 2 much more complicated weak auras in order to do the mechanic is very funny to me because it just points to how broken that is mechanic.
Yeah. Good times. We are well over.
Long, but we're gonna go ahead and wrap things up. One actual last thing, no podcast next week.
That's true.
Vacation stuff.
I unfortunately on vacation.
And so am I. So ow, my desk.
There we go.
All right, we're gonna wrap this up. Thank you all for watching and or listening. I hope you enjoyed this. And if you did and you want to support it and the other work that we do over at the Peak of Serenity, you can do that over at our Patreon at patreon.com/Peak of Serenity. And of course, come and join the Discord. It is the best place to learn the ins and outs of new stuff like the new Manatee or Brewmaster's new rotation, which actually now has support on WoW Analyzer as well. You know, all kinds of cool stuff you can get through the Peak of Serenity Discord. But yeah, that is going to be it for our show today. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next week.
Bye.